Today I'm going to be showing you how to make one of the best breads in the world. This is pan sobao. The pan sobao is a Puerto Rican style bread that is very tender, soft, and sweet. Now to make this bread, the first thing you're gonna need is 2 cups of bread flour. And since this is a sweet bread, we're gonna need 3.5 tablespoons of sugar, 1.5 tablespoons of shortening, 6 ounces of warm water, half a teaspoon of salt, and last 1.5 teaspoons of instant yeast. Now in a big bowl, add the water. I always like to add the water first because I feel that not that much dough sticks to the bottom if I do it this way. Then we're gonna add the shortening. Then we're gonna add the sugar and the yeast. Now on a regular day, I always use warm water, but if the day is really hot, it's best to use cold water because this is gonna help your dough not get so soft while kneading. Now mix all of this together until you notice that the sugar has dissolved. Now since I'm using instant yeast, there's no need for me to proof it. For this recipe, I used shortening, but in the panaderias, the bakeries in Puerto Rico, most of the time what we use is lard. So use whatever you have at hand, or either shortening or lard. The only thing is that the lard is gonna give it like a richer taste, but it won't be that much of a difference. Then we need to add our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. So start by adding the flour and the salt. We then are gonna mix all of these ingredients together until we form like a loose dough ball. To make this recipe, I used the bowl, but you can make this recipe straight on your counter. Or you can use the stand mixer if you have one. You can add your ingredients all at the same time and just mix it on low speed. You'll know when you're done mixing because your dough will look like this, kind of dry and lumpy. That's what you're looking for because this is not a very wet dough. But if you're using a stand mixer, you're gonna keep on going and you're gonna need this for about 8 to 10 minutes. But if you're doing this recipe by hand like me, after everything is mixed, you're gonna dump everything on your table. And remember to scrape your bowl to remove any of the dough that is stuck to it. Then we're gonna start kneading this dough, and this is gonna take about 15 minutes. The first thing that I like to do with the dough is that I like to press it down because I want to try and with that same dough to pick up those little bits and pieces that are on the counter and that extra flour that is on the counter. As you can see right here, this dough is not a very wet dough. This is on the drier side. So there shouldn't be no need to add more flour to this. But there's many reasons why your dough could be wet. The dough can be too sticky if you added too much water or if the temperature of the water was wrong. And if this was the case that the temperature of the water was wrong, it was because it was too hot. Hot water tends to make the dough very, very soft and super sticky. Here's an example of how a dough looks when you use very hot water. This happened to me once, so never again. So just make sure that the water that you use is just lukewarm, not hot. If not, it is gonna be very, very hard to knead this dough and you're just gonna get frustrated and you're gonna end up adding more flour. So if you notice that your dough is very sticky, just add 1 teaspoon of flour at a time. As you can see, my hand had some stickiness, but it wasn't nothing bad. And since I'm doing this dough by hand, I always like to do the window pane test, which you just have to take a piece of your dough, stretch it out, and it shouldn't break quickly. It should stretch and get very thin. You could kind of see through it. And once your dough is ready, you're gonna divide it in half. Each half of bread, we call it in Puerto Rico media libra de pan, which means half a pound of bread, because each loaf should be about half a pound. You could use a scale if you want to be super accurate, and just in case you do, I weighted each ball and each one was around 253 to 255 grams each. So now what we need to do is we're gonna take each ball and we're gonna stretch it out. You want to stretch it until you kind of make like a rectangle that is about 12 by 6 inches. Now at the beginning, I always try to stretch the dough by hand because I want to make it as perfect as possible, because when you start rolling this, if it's not even, it's gonna show. And don't worry if yours don't look perfect because I make this bread all the time, and trust me, some of my loaves be looking kind of funny, so don't worry about it. Now I have a good tip for you so your loaves could be nice and smooth. So if you feel that your surface is kind of sticky, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take a little bit of shortening and you're gonna rub it on your surface And what this is gonna do is gonna help the dough not stick to your surface, and it's gonna be very, very smooth, and it's gonna be way easier to roll too. So after you flatten your dough, you're gonna be ready to make your cylinder. You're gonna start by slowly lifting one side of the dough, and you're gonna start rolling slowly. There's no rush. You wanna make a nice, even cylinder. And the panaderias, the bakeries, they have a machine that makes the cylinders, and they look absolutely beautiful. Just gorgeous, nice and smooth. But since we don't have the machine, our hands will have to do the job. Once you start rolling, you will notice if you left one side thicker than the other one, it's gonna show. If you really mind, then roll it again. But if not, just leave it as is. And then that part you see right there where the dough ends, you're gonna pinch it because you don't want your bread to open once it starts baking. And you can also roll it a little bit so that seam could kind of flatten, but don't worry because that's not going to show. That seam, you're going to put it facing down on your tray with parchment paper. When you set your dough on the tray, make sure that you leave at least 2 inches apart from the side of the tray because remember, this bread is going to grow. Then we're going to repeat the same steps with the other dough ball that we have left. Now, this recipe for pan sobao that I'm making here, I had it in my website for a very long time. And I got a comment on this recipe about how the bread loaves were very small. And yes, you could think these bread loaves are on the smaller side, but this is just how they are made on the island. But this is also just a matter of preference. So if you want to make bigger pan sobao loaves, all you got to do is just double the recipe. In the description below, I'm going to leave you the pan sobao recipe. And in there in the website, on the recipe card, you could change your portion so you could double the recipe and even triple the recipe, and all the ingredient quantities are going to change depending on which quantity you select. Now after we finish shaping all the bread, we're going to put it in your tray, and you need to proof this bread. The way that I like to proof this bread is I like to turn on the oven light, not the oven itself, and there I'll put the bread and let it rise. You need to let this dough rise for 2 hours, but to be honest, sometimes I leave it a little longer, like an hour more, so 3 hours. But this could depend a lot on the temperature in your kitchen. If it's a cold day, it will take even longer to rise. But if it's a hot and humid day, your bread is gonna rise very fast. You could also let this recipe rise overnight in your fridge, but it must be covered because you don't want your bread dough to get dry. And in this stage, this is how your dough should look. This recipe right here, I let it rise for 2 hours, and this is how the bread looks. Now remember, this is following the original recipe. But if you wanted bigger loaves and then you doubled the recipe, you let it rise, this is how it should look. These were also let to proof for 2 hours, and look how big they are. And keep in mind that they're not even baked yet, that once they bake, they'll grow a little more in size. Now in this video, I'll be showing you 3 different batches of bread. The first one, which is the regular recipe. The second one that you just seen, that is the double the portion. And this one, which is just the regular recipe, is just I scored the bread. Just because I wanted to show you how the bread looks. And this is a good recipe so you can see how the bread looks once it's not shaped evenly. And it is really good that I'm showing you this recipe because in this recipe I couldn't make my cylinders even, so if it happens to you, don't worry about it, it's still gonna be delicious. Now once you finish everything and your dough is proofed, you're gonna preheat your oven to 350 and you're gonna cook for 22 minutes. Just make sure that halfway through you rotate your tray so the bread could brown evenly. And now look how pretty the scored bread looks. Now you're gonna see how the bread that it was double the recipe looks. The bread looks like one of those supermarket bread loaves, and it is huge. But if you like bread this big, then just go for it, because trust me, it will still be delicious. And finally, you're gonna see how the regular recipe looks. This is pan sobao just like in the bakery. I love how it looks without being scored. If you're a Puerto Rican watching this and you make this recipe, this is gonna take you straight home. You're gonna be standing right there in the line in la panaderia just looking at that bread. Now just let me tell you that what you see right there, ooh, that is the best part of the bread. I'm not even gonna tell you how we call it, but that is the best part of the bread. Trust me, when we used to go to the bakery, ooh, that part will never make it home. Now if you never had pan sobao, please make the recipe. Try it and tell me in the comments if it's really one of the best breads you had. Now look how the bread looks looks at the bottom. It has that beautiful golden crust. Now on top of the bread is gonna have a similar color with a beautiful crust, but this crust is not gonna be hard. It's just it looks very brown because of the sugar. Now you're gonna be able to see the inside and it's very fluffy. Now you might want to wait a little bit before cutting until it cools off so you don't burn yourself. Now I suggest that while it's still hot, you take a little piece and you're gonna put a little bit of butter. It's gonna melt and it is really good. Trust me, I know I'm biased because I'm Puerto Rican, but from all the recipes on my website, this is definitely number one. If you have any questions or comments about the recipe, just let me know in the comments section. Now don't think because this is a sweet bread is only meant for breakfast. This is the perfect bread to have with your morning coffee, to use it as sandwich bread, to dip it on a nice soup bowl, or just to have a little piece as a snack. And as always, thank you so much for watching the video. Buen provecho and see you on the next one.